great honor and privilege to introduce Jeffrey Sachs. Many of you know Jeffrey Sachs through his amazing books, The End of Poverty, a courageous and incredibly important book. His most recent book, Commonwealth, Economics for a Crowded Planet. Jeff, as you know, is one of the top economic minds in the world today. I got to meet Jeff, and the reason I invited him here in 2007, when I was with the UN Global Compact in Switzerland, I was sharing with you earlier the excitement and the importance in that meeting. And Jeffrey Sachs was talking, and more than the words, you really began to feel how close we are as a human family to being able to completely eradicate extreme grinding poverty. And I started thinking about our generation and what that means for our generation. And when Jeff talked, at one point he pounded the table, and I had tears in my eyes. And I shared with you other parts of that meeting. That night, when I was going to bed in Switzerland, Nelson Mandela was on the BBC sharing, the vision of the Elders Council. And he said something very similar, as if he had read Jeff's book. He said, Mandela said, we can be the first generation in human history to eradicate extreme poverty. And then Mandela's voice, there was a long pause, and he said, but I refuse to miss this opportunity. I fell asleep that night. Tom Brokaw's phrase popped into my head, the greatest generation. And I thought, what are they going to call our generation? And maybe it has something to do with the privilege of living at this time where we can grapple with these issues in the way that Jeffrey Sachs has tirelessly worked to put these things on the agenda. He's special advisor to Ban Ki-moon. He's director of the Millennium Development Plans and Goals, the 12 to 15 goals and promises. And we are just so fortunate, Jeff, and thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to you, and I know that we're going to have some time for some interaction with questions and so on. So help me welcome Jeffrey Sachs.
David, and all of you, thank you so much for letting me join. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. It's a real privilege to be with you, and it's a privilege to join in anything that David Cooper-Ryder is doing, because not only is he thinking big and boldly, but he's figuring out extraordinarily creative and innovative ways to get things done. And so, David, I'm really delighted to join you. Thanks for the nice words. Thank you so much for the nice words. Let me put not to take away from the optimism, but let me put another matter on the table. We are the first generation that can end extreme poverty, or we can be the last generation to have a viable planet. And that's a rather shocking choice. And so far, we're making a miserable hash of it, I have to say. On the one hand, in this time of unbelievable technological wonder, the mere fact that we can have a nice discussion like this very routinely by video conference, and a million other wonders that we could cite. And at the same time, the fact that our political system nationally and our global sense of cooperation has been so extraordinarily weak, to my mind, is really the paradox that we're grappling with. And we all hope that appreciative inquiry as a process for bringing people together can play a significant role in helping to end that paradox of tremendous capability matched by tremendous blundering, I would say, and inability to this point to face up to reality. Now, when I think about the planetary reality, I have one dominant word in my mind these days, and that is crowded. The world is crowded. There's 7 billion of us. We are all jostling for resources. The world has never been, of course, so populated, and it's never been so much under the human pressures that we have today. There's no place to run, there's no place to hide, there's no vast new frontier other than in our ideas and in our science, but not in the physical earth itself. That interconnectedness drives home both the moral and the practical imperatives of facing up to challenges like extreme poverty, but it also means that the challenges of keeping the planet itself alive in a way which can keep our societies in the kind of security that we're hoping for is an imminent, direct, serious, profound challenge that we barely have in our own heads right now. Now, I'm sure that you do, I know I do, I know the president does, but when the American people were recently polled about their priorities, climate change, for example, came out 20th out of 20 items on the list. Of course, people talked about jobs, they talked about their bank accounts, they talked about crime, they talked about terrorism and so on. But they, I believe, do not really properly appreciate the uniqueness of our time. Yes, we are the first generation that can end extreme poverty, but we are also the last generation of the fossil fuel era that can continue even for a few years more the way that our whole global economy has evolved over the past 2 centuries. So when you get together to talk about massive innovation, you're exactly right. It's not massive innovation merely because we have the capacity to massively innovate. It's not massive innovation in the sense that innovation is fun and stimulating, which of course it is, and can bring wonders to us. It's a need for massive innovation because the ways of doing things that we're doing right now, the ways that we power the economy, the ways that we transport ourselves, that's pretty obvious with the bankruptcy of 2 out of our 3 U.S. Auto companies within the last month. The way that we grow our food, the way that we treat each other on the planet beyond our national boundaries is no longer viable. And I believe that the deep crisis we're in is more than a subprime crisis, more than a crisis of the Fed, more than a crisis of irresponsibility and greed, though it's all of those things. It is also a crisis of the living earth, because the energy crisis, the food crisis, the water crisis, the instability that's resulted from that is all played into the current financial crisis that we're feeling. So a concept that I find very powerful, troubling but powerful, as part of this crowded planet is a concept due to a Nobel laureate, one of the 3 scientists who disentangled the ozone depletion effect, an atmospheric chemist named Paul Crutzen. And his concept is the Anthropocene. The idea of the Anthropocene is Crutzen's message to us that we are in a new geological epoch. The geologists call our epoch the Holocene, and that's the period since the last ice age, which was the Pleistocene. But Crutzen says, no, we're no longer in the Holocene, which is the period of the last 10,000 years. We are in a new epoch, which he gave the term Anthropocene, meaning the human era of the planet. And he meant something very literal by that, and deeply disturbing. What he meant by that is that human activity, that is basically what we call our global economy, 7 billion people averaging about $10,000 of output per person, is now weighing so heavily on the Earth that it is deranging actually how the Earth systems work. And we know that about climate change because we've been getting a crash lesson in greenhouse gases. And we've been learning that our emissions of carbon dioxide through deforestation and fossil fuel use, or our emissions of methane from our landfills and our livestock and our rice paddies, or our emissions of nitrous oxide from our use of nitrogen-based fertilizers, is changing the climate in fundamental and very, very dangerous ways. But Crutzen goes beyond climate change, because basically what he and now thousands of scientists around the world are realizing is that our impact is hitting just about every major ecosystem in the world and every major Earth physical system. Climate is part of it, but the water cycle, for example, what the scientists call the hydrologic cycle, is now so overtaken by human use, mainly to grow food, that the biggest rivers in the world no longer run to the sea, that the groundwater is plummeting as the water table is falling sharply in areas where hundreds of millions of people live. The snow melt and glacier melt that provides the water for Pakistan and India and China and parts of the American West out of the Rockies and other mountain ranges in the Andean region, that's either disappearing as the glaciers disappear or changing seasonality as the snowmelt becomes just rainfall in the wintertime, so that what we depend on now for irrigation won't be there even in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Land use is so fundamentally now under the control of human beings for growing food and pasturing livestock that human society takes over almost half of all of the photosynthesis produced on the planet at this point. Now, how did this happen? It's so unbelievable, the magnitudes, but it's basically the law of geometric growth. The world population and the world economy has been growing at 4% per year. That means a doubling of every 17 years, roughly. You do that long enough, you fill the planet. And this is a lesson we were warned about in Limits to Growth back in 1972. And I remember how my teachers poo-pooed that. They said, oh, don't listen to that. You know, price signals, the market will save us. And the market isn't saving us. What we're seeing in this Anthropocene is that the very life support systems on the planet are at peril. At the same time as we have all of these wondrous technologies that could not only address those problems, but actually overcome the chronic afflictions of our planet, hunger, disease, and extreme poverty, all of the scourges that have been with us from time immemorial, but now are subject to fundamental amelioration in a way that they never were before. So it's a cliche to say it, but from my point of view, I can't help believing it, that we're at a crossroads. Because you go one direction and we absolutely wreck the planet, and you go another direction and we have a flowering of a global society, interconnected, being able to tap into wondrous knowledge shared worldwide. And that's a pretty stark choice. I don't think it's an exaggeration, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't think it's just the fact that every generation, sees its unique situation. Other generations have had other unique challenges. But I believe that this challenge of choosing consciously, deliberatively, which direction we're going is really our generation's choice. Now, the bummer in all of this, frankly, is we don't even know it's our choice. We're barely conscious of this because we're trying to keep our heads above water day to day, because we've got an economy where we run to get ahead, because we don't give the future the kind of thought that we should as mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. And the result is that we have this unbelievable set of alternatives, one fairly disastrous and the other absolutely grand, and we're barely conscious that we have these alternatives. There are many voices who say this is all stupid, you know, everything I'm saying, oh, that's pseudoscience, it's a hoax, it's and so on. I happen to head an institute of 800 scientists. I'd be happy to put any of them in a room with any of these skeptics, and they'd find out something real. These skeptics do not know what they're talking about, and they don't talk to real science, and they do a real disservice for the rest of our society. But then there's another group of people. I come across them every day because there are a lot of people in my profession, economics, that feel this way, that says, oh, this idea that societies choose anything, that's stupid. What are societies? Societies are individuals. Leave us alone. We'll make our own choices. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to be bossed around and so on. And so the idea of group deliberation, whether it's the group that you're in right now, or whether it's the group that constitutes our nation as a polity, or whether it's the group that I believe in, which is a global society, interconnected as never before, there are a lot of people who say groups can't make decisions. That's why I'm with David, because we got to have group decision making where people deliberate together, and they deliberate creatively and appreciatively so they understand that we are in this together and that we need group goals. And that's why I admire so much this idea and this whole approach. Now, what does this mean practically? And I'll be brief, because unfortunately, as an academic with all the bad accumulated habits, I could go on for hours and absolutely bore the wits out of you. But what it means is, in my view, that we need to recast how our global economy works. At the core of that is new technology that can harmonize a reality of 7 billion people on the planet, growing still by 75 to 80 million per year, with their aspirations to have a life not of misery, but a life of adequate needs, with a physical planet that is under unprecedented and growing stress. I call that the challenge of, or I and others, but I tend to use the expression sustainable development for that challenge. And I believe that technology is critical. A lot of people also disagree with me on that because they say, God, technology, that's what got us into this mess. You know, industrial food systems, that's why we're so unhealthy. That's what's polluting the planet. Why do you talk about technology, Jeff? And the answer is that a lot of things that we would love to be true, me included, that we can get by on local foods and organic farming, for example, from everything I understand, just is no longer true with 7 billion people. It might have been true with 1 billion people on the planet, as we had in 1820. Conceivably, it could have been true with 2 billion people on the planet, as we had in 1930. Maybe with 3 billion people on the planet, as we had in 1950. But with that geometric growth, we're at 7 billion. And either a lot of lives are going to be written off, or we're going to have to use very smart technologies to find a way to reconcile that global population size with the needs of individual people. What kind of innovation systems? We're going to need new energy systems. Renewables. In my opinion, by the way, nuclear power. In my opinion, clean coal, meaning capturing the carbon dioxide at coal plants and putting it underground. And I have to tell you, or you know it, a lot of people disagree with me on those 2 points. They say there's no such thing as safe nuclear and there's no such thing as clean coal. But when I do the arithmetic, I don't see how we're going to address 7 billion people on the planet without using those technologies. We're going to need new transport systems. I think the bankruptcy of GM is clear enough on this. The internal combustion era, which lasted 100 years, is over in my view. We're going to have to go to electric propelled vehicles, whether it's plug-in hybrids, fuel cells, battery-powered, and we're going to need a new power grid to enable that to happen. We're going to need a new infrastructure. So GM will go into bankruptcy, it can come out of bankruptcy, but it can't survive, in my opinion, unless we move to a new generation of automobiles, plus mass public transit, light rail, and urban transit that is needed to revolutionize how we move. I think the way we lay out our cities is going to have to change, frankly. You know, we're the country of the greatest sprawl. We drive the farthest. We drive to the malls. We drive to the strip malls. And I think that this kind of lifestyle, while it enables us to enjoy this vast space of our country, is so resource using that I believe it's actually not viable the way that we've been going, and that the more densely settled areas like the place I live, which is New York City, which has a very high population density, so you walk just about to everywhere. You don't drive to a mall, you walk to a local store in mixed use neighborhoods, I think is going to be the way that most of the world, and I hope more of the United States, actually moves. We're going to need a new food system. It will surprise you to know that when you add everything in, food, even more than power or automobiles, is the #1 contributor of greenhouse gases. If you think about the deforestation, the nitrous oxide, the methane, the energy that goes into the fertilizer, the energy that goes into the mechanization, the energy that goes into the transport of food, the food sector actually is the dominant single source of greenhouse gases. Boy, is this a tough problem. We've got so many problems with the global food supply that it helps us to understand why food prices have soared and why the number of hungry people on the planet has risen by about 200 million, rough estimate, during the last 3 years. We got climate shocks, falling groundwater, soil erosion. We've got greenhouse gas emission challenges. We've got a growing human population. We've got a growing demand for beef. And remember, you need 10 of everything. 10 units of land, 10 units of water, 10 units of feed, photosynthesis output for every kilogram or every unit of beef as final consumption. And we're putting a lot of our food chain through the cow, and then you lose on a 1-to-10 ratio in essence, and out comes this increasing stress. So these are the issues that are big. Thank God we have a president who talks about them now, because we just went through 8 years where I don't know if the president knew anything about them, but he never talked about them and spent almost all his time dissing them. And now we have a president that talks about them, but I'm not sure we have a Congress that will act on them, or an American public that's ready to face somewhat higher fuel prices, somewhat higher electricity bills to pay the extra costs for a clean system. And our political system wants to say, you know, if it's green, it's free, new opportunities, green jobs, and so on. But let me tell you, it's going to cost us a bit more. We're going to have to invest real resources that we otherwise wouldn't invest in order to go to a low carbon economy, in order to use slightly more expensive fuels than coal. So it is going to cost us more money, but it's actually going to save our lives and save the planet. It's just a question of whether we can get organized to do it. Now, finally, here's the big challenge. Here we are talking with each other. How do we move at a national scale and a global scale to actually accomplish these things? I think that's the biggest puzzle. That's where David comes in with his insights about appreciative collaborative means, appreciative inquiry, group decision making, goal setting, and so on. But can we do this? Can we find ways to do this at a large enough scale and fast enough? We can certainly make nice headlines that we're doing something for poverty, we're doing something for climate, we're changing the light bulbs. Those are nice things, but I'm a quantitative measurer of material flow. That's what I do for a living. Number of people, how much energy they use, how much carbon dioxide goes up, how much it costs, and so on to address these things. I basically have a career based on spreadsheets in a way, trying to measure quantitatively. How can we get to a quantitative scale? And realizing also this paradox that sometimes we do things that feel good, that are symbolic, that actually blind us because they give us a sense that we're doing wonderful things so we can check that one off the list, and we haven't really solved the problem. So that's what I worry about, frankly, every day. I've been for 10 years working on extreme poverty, and indifference is the number one enemy for sure, but symbolism is probably the number two enemy. You know, some nice symbolic thing that doesn't add up to much, but which gives a sense of fulfillment that really isn't true fulfillment, but is only a superficial response to the deep crisis. And that's where I find we have the biggest challenge. Now, finally, let me just summarize a few things about how this will have to work in my understanding of this and in my opinion. First, markets alone cannot do this. Markets alone will never solve the problem of poverty. Though business at the bottom of the pyramid is a piece of a solution, it is never going to deliver life-saving health care to starving people. It's never going to address the people that I'm working with that are out in remote rural areas, not even connected by a road, certainly not a power grid or anything like that. And nobody's coming to rescue these people through business. We need approaches that go beyond markets. Markets alone are not going to solve the greenhouse gas problems. Markets alone are not going to have us decide whether and how we can use nuclear or whether carbon capture and sequestration works. Science can't be based on market forces alone. Innovation can't be based on market forces alone. Now, markets play a huge role, but so does government, so do NGOs, so do local communities. So this is quintessentially a multi-stakeholder problem. It's not something that comes only through market forces, but we all live in a country where market is seen as the solution to almost everything, and it's not going to be the solution. It's just going to be a piece of the solution to this. Markets do not work to end extreme poverty. They do not promote the R&D that we need by themselves. They do not provide the infrastructure that we need, which is a public responsibility, and they're not very good at looking towards the sustainable future, because markets are perfectly capable of depleting things massively. Second, we need plans, and we're a pretty bad society at planning these days. Planning became an evil word. Communist plan, we do markets. But, you know, everybody needs to plan. Businesses, of course, need to plan, and we as a society need to plan. But where is our carbon plan? Where is our climate change plan? Where is our plan to end extreme poverty? We don't have it. Because I know it, because I get attacked when I talk about making plans for this. I'm told that's, you know, you're so, that's socialism, that's communism. No, that's thinking ahead in an organized and rational way. Not that we can plan everything, but we can lay out a kind of roadmap. In addition to that, we need, of course, design principles, and that's what is so wonderful about your workshop. It's combining appreciative inquiry and the concept of design. We can plan a roadmap, but we don't know how it's going to work until we try things. And designers try things. They model things. They put out approaches. If they're good, those models should be scaled up. If they're bad, they should be changed. But there's a tremendous amount of creativity that is required in all of this. Finally, when we have working models, we need to have mechanisms to scale them up globally. Because after all, ladies and gentlemen, take climate change. The U.S., which has been by far the biggest contributor to global climate change up until now ranks second to China. And China will become more and more a preeminent force in this. India will become a bigger force. The developing world as a group now emits more greenhouse gases than the developed countries. That doesn't let us off the hook because per person we do a lot more, but there are more people in the developing world. But what does it mean? It means if you want to solve this problem, we have to cooperate with China. We can't yell at them because we haven't done anything on this for decades. We have to cooperate. We have to cooperate with India. We have to cooperate with other countries. We can't say anymore, that's not our business. It's all our business now. Whether it's the swine flu coming from abroad, whether it's climate change that is a global phenomenon, whether it's terrorism coming from abroad, whether it's mass migration movements, we are a global, interconnected, crowded, unsustainable society right now. And so we're going to have to do this at a global scale. And we're going to have to treat counterparts abroad not as objects of our desire or obstacles for us, but as subjects in their own right, with their own goals, their own needs, their own objectives, with whom we partner to solve these problems. So this is the challenge of our generation. Ending poverty is part of it, but we better be moving fast to understand how big the stakes are, how big our opportunities are, how big the risks are, and how global this challenge is. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, one of the pieces that just does stand out is this whole question. It's how do we change at the scale of the whole? And it requires a whole different mindset. You know, we think about top-down methodologies, or oppositely, we think about bottom-up methodologies. But what you're talking about is something that's not top-down, not bottom-up, but it's change at the scale of the whole and the multi-sectoral part of it. Anyway, thank you again for joining us. Lots and lots of important things for us to think about.